Okay, let's think a little bit as a board member, and a crisis occurs, or we're seeing something coming at our organization. When should the board intervene and or bring in outside counsel?
Well, I would say board members, the saying is we should have our noses in and hands out. Board members, there are a group of situations where board members actively need to play a role. And that is dealing with the board member's one employee, and that's the CEO. So if the crisis is regarding the CEO, in other words, the loss of the CEO or some type of situation involving the CEO, of which Dale has referred to them, it's in the headlines every day. You've had situations of behavioral issues related to a CEO and a member of his staff. You've had situations of a death of a CEO or a serious illness of a CEO. That is when the board actually does play a role in that crisis. Otherwise, the board needs to serve as an advisor to the CEO and the management team and let them do what they were hired to do. Back to what I said in the beginning, the board needs to make sure that the management team is prepared for a crisis before they have one. So to Dale and Will's point, they need to make sure that the board that the management team has conducted a risk analysis, that they've developed scenario plans and how they will respond, that they've practiced how they will respond, and that they've lined up the necessary outside counsel, advisors, insurance, whatever types of support that they will need in the event of a crisis. They need to make sure all of those ducks are in a row and be prepared. There may be an occasion, one other situation where the board plays an active role. But as Chris and I were discussing before the program started, this is a very unique situation that I don't consider in the normal crisis bucket, but it is a crisis, and that is shareholder activism. That is something that you need to have a completely full-blown plan that is slightly different than your crisis plan, and that is also where a board may be involved, because that usually involves the board and governance. And there are members here in the audience who could speak to this ad infinitum. And but that is another situation, crisis situation, in which the board will play an active role.
Dale or Will?
Yeah, I'll start. Again, I'll play off of what she just stated. And I'm a CEO and I have a board. I will tell you, the last thing I want is a board sticking their nose too deep into something in the middle of a crisis, unless, and this is the big unless, it is my job of the management team as described to manage crisis. If the C-suite or the management team, myself as the CEO, are not moving quickly, we are not clearly prepared, the board can sense it, and the board, at that point, their role is to be asking the hard questions. If I was to give you a checklist, my key criteria for when the board should intervene is when reputational damage is imminent. Number two, when there is real financial risk in the short term and or the long term. Three, operational risk to the firm. And ultimately, the C-suite appears to be stumbling. That is my overall kind of checklist mentality of when the board should intervene. That being said, to make this real, I'll make just a couple of statements. Visa, Palo Alto, Deloitte, They all were warned about the Ukraine. They all had assets and people in the Ukraine. They were warned over and over for 2 months to get ready, and they literally assumed it away and did not believe Russia would row tanks and start a war. I could use that same template about a coup in Turkey, about wildfires in Los Angeles, about the fall of Kabul. And every one of these scenarios, every one of those firms has resiliency books, does tabletops, but yet they were still not fully prepared. So there is a disconnect on when to pull that trigger, and the board's role is to be asking hard questions and do not assume away global politics, global geopolitics, and what can happen next in these regions. And don't fail from a lack of imagination of what can happen will happen. I see this often with boards. Ultimately, they've got to be asking the hard, gritty questions. If the management team is on top of it and has real answers, great. If they don't, or you sense they are not fully prepared, that is your time to inject yourself around reputation, financial, and operational risk.
Let me jump in there, Dale, with something you said. So as a board member, whether it's a public company or a private company, is it appropriate for me to talk to internal or external individuals?
Do you want me to answer that, ma'am?
Go ahead, and then I'll call on Francis.
Okay. So I'll be very, very direct here. Internally, the board should be talking to the C-suite as described. Externally, I do not believe the board should be communicating anything unless the CEO and the management team have failed to properly manage the communication externally to the public and internally to affected employees, family members, things like that. Ultimately, I think the board's role is internal only. It should not be publicly or outwardly facing unless, again, they sense they're going in the wrong direction.
Thank you, Dale. I'll share with you on the board that I serve on, we had an issue, and our CEO was very clear with us as board members that we should not speak directly to the media. Our general counsel was as clear as could be as well. And what we were just instructed to redirect them back to the CEO. The concern there is that as a board member, you might disclose something, especially if you're on a publicly traded board, that gives the company some exposure. And so really support the response that Dale had, which as a board member, I'm just redirecting them right back to the CEO. Now, as a board member, I want to be engaged and educated on the situation, which our CEO did a very good job with that, and our general counsel did as well. But Francis, what would you add onto that?
Well, I'm in violent agreement with both of you. What I would say is the other issue is, first of all, with the media, if they see an opportunity to try and reach a board member and that board member bites, the first thing that they'll start doing is trying to find the weak link and to get someone to say something that they shouldn't be saying. And all of a sudden, the crisis becomes what that individual has said. You may again be publicly disclosing material information that needed to go through another channel. You may be creating a whole nother crisis on top of what the actual crisis was. So, as Dale has already articulated very clearly and very well, board members should not be speaking externally unless there has been a decision within the board and the CEO may perhaps begrudgingly, but that the management team has not performed their duties in communicating, and that the board has basically usurped that position from the management team. But that should be done quite rarely, and in that particular situation, there clearly need to be other consequences after the crisis is over. And I just want to reiterate again what Dale said. Management teams that really fulfill their responsibility in this area do know what they're doing, and particularly companies that recognize these vulnerabilities, whether they are geopolitical, whether they involve, their exposure to incidents, their exposure to violence. I made the comment when we were discussing this that I worked for an energy company, and our CEO would never have been walking. First of all, the location of our investor meeting would have never been disclosed in a press release. It would have never been publicly disclosed. And our CEO would never have been walking the streets of New York unaccompanied. Now, we didn't have armed policemen with him, but believe me, we had high-level security at every event and everywhere our CEO went. It wasn't evident to everyone, but we knew it. And that's not a criticism. Don't take it as such. I'm just making the point that these things are things people need to be concerned about for the very reason that Dale articulated. They have financial implications and operational implications. That was a black swan event for United Healthcare Group and continues to be. So these are the types of vulnerabilities, real vulnerabilities, and they do happen every day. Wiping out half of the city of Los Angeles or more is a real vulnerability in this day and age.